So good afternoon, everybody. As Jennifer said, Mike Mansell. I'm a Senior Executive Building Surveyor in the Fire and Building Control Department of Cork City Council. I'd like to thank the National Building Control Office for inviting me to speak here today on a very important CBD day. I suppose I'd like to thank Richard for the graveyard shift that I'm about to present on. So, as Jennifer said, I'm just going to discuss, I suppose, our view of the procedures on the receipt of a CCC or a Certificate of Compliance and Completion. So kind of straight into it, submitting a completion cert. So what do the regulations say? Well, under BCAR Part 20F, it says a certificate of compliance and completion should be submitted to a building control authority, and the relevant particulars shall be included on the register maintained, obviously under the building control regulations, and very importantly, before the building or the works is opened, occupied or used. There was a lot of discussion about the types of commencement notices and so on that are submitted. Well, for a certificate of compliance and completion, there are two commencement notices that you need a certificate of compliance and completion to be submitted for. That's a commencement notice with additional documentation and the 7-day notice. So you don't need a commencement or don't need a CCC for an opt-out, which was discussed and debated a lot earlier on, or a commencement notice without additional documentation. So the cert itself, obviously, everyone in the room will be familiar with the BCMS system. The cert itself is uploaded and is supporting documentation through the BCMS system. And it's in the form as specified. We'll have a look at the form in a bit more detail in a while. And it's accompanied by plans, calculations, specifications, and other details. And essentially the reason for all the plans, the calculations, the specifications, and maybe how they differ from what was submitted at commencement stage is very importantly to show compliance with the requirements of the second schedule of the building regulations. I suppose the final part on it is, and you know, a very, very important part of the completion cert submission is the inspection plan as implemented by the assigned certifier. And I suppose as discussed, the code of practice for inspecting and certifying buildings is something that was discussed in a lot of detail. So it's referred to in the code of practice, the details. Very important document. They come in all shapes and forms into ourselves, depending on the scale of the building project. But the inspection plan itself is how the building or the works are inspected during the course of construction. So, you know, we'd expect to see obviously photographs, we'd expect to see dates and so on. So what's expected of ourselves as a building control authority? So on receipt of the certificate and obviously the supporting documentation, we have to record the date it was submitted, which is very important, and then consider within the 21 days, everyone will be aware the 21 days validation period, whether that certificate is valid or not. During that period, we obviously do our own checks and balances, which I'll discuss in a couple of slides' time, and what we do in Cork City Council. So the Building Control Authority also has to satisfy itself with regards any maybe Section 11 information requests, enforcement notices that may be there, anything to do with a fire safety cert or a disability access cert that may be granted, or a revised fire safety cert or a revised disability access cert. So all those checks and balances are done in those 21 days. Again, very, very importantly, down towards the bottom, I've just said the cert itself needs to be put and placed on the register before the works or the building to which it applies can be open, occupied or used. So just back to the Code of Practice itself, which is an excellent document, a lot of information contained inside there. I think Mairead also mentioned the framework for building control authorities, another very, very good document, and the BCMS system itself. So Code of Practice says the following under 3.6, the Building Control Authority shall process applications for fire safety certs, disability access certs, and issue decisions on those, validate and register commencement notice and 7-day notices, and the documentation and certificates around those. What I'm talking about now, validate and register the completion cert and accompanying documentation, and maintain a public register of all that documentation above. As well as that, we should maintain records around inspections that we carry out ourselves, carry out a risk analysis of all the CNs that are submitted to us in order to inform our own inspection arrangements. And again, something that comes up a lot in Cork City Council, advise the assigned certifier in relation to issues of compliance relating to the building or works that are disputed by the parties to the construction project. So that can come up, different issues can come up from time to time. As Doug said, ring your local building control authority, have a chat with them, talk it through, see what can be agreed and done. So again, under the Code of Practice, the submission itself, 8.1 of the Code of Practice, at the completion stage, the assigned certifier is required to submit the following to the Building Control Authority: the cert itself. The cert is signed by the builder under Part A and signed by the assigned certifier under Part B. We spoke about the plans, calculations, and supporting documentation to show compliance. Also spoke about the inspection plan as implemented. And again, just on the bottom, we have 21 days to validate all that information. I suppose the centerpiece of the submission is the completion cert. Very, very important conveyancing document that's out there. Probably the most important conveyancing document that's there for a building or works. A statutory document that it is. Anyone that's reading it, anyone that's completing it, make sure the information you're supplying is correct and accurate. So from ourselves, I suppose when BCAR was brought in 2014, and just bear in mind the numbers of completion certs we get in Cork City Council, for example, we receive somewhere around 400 completion certs per annum. So a lot of work in processing the completion certs. Not sure how well that's coming out on the PowerPoint, but essentially what you see on the presentation is we have in Cork City Council a 2-page validation checklist. So it's, I suppose the reason I produced it at the time was to standardize our process, to make our process consistent with regards how we validate completion certs. It obviously contains all the important information regarding compliance and our role as a building control authority as outlined in the regulations and the Code of Practice. So it is 2 parts. It depending on the notice and whether we have a commencement notice file or carried out inspection. So the first part on the right hand side is the first page. It's predominantly for our administrative colleagues. A lot of the information is extracted straight from the BCMS system. So you have the date it was submitted, the due date for the 21 days, is it a pre-notification, the description, the numbers from the BCMS submission itself. Have there been any changes maybe to the assigned certifier or the builder? I think this was, Doug mentioned this a couple of moments ago. Is there a clearly labeled schedule of drawings and documents or an annex? Annex is very, very important document. It should list everything that's been submitted. The centerpiece itself, halfway down the kind of page, so the certificate of compliance and completion, has it the correct local authority on it? We get quite a few, particularly with the boundary extension that Doug mentioned. Cork County Council, Cork City Council had a big boundary extension, so get ones where the wrong local authority is mentioned. Has it the correct submission number? Is it the same builder? Is it the same assigned certifier? So they're the checks and balances that we do to make sure everything is there. The inspection plan is checked that it's there as well. If there isn't a CN file or we haven't carried out inspections for it, our administrative staff finish the validation on BCMS. The completion cert is actually printed in hard copy and filed away. If there is a CN file, as we call it, or we have carried out control inspections during the course of construction, the bottom half of page 1 and the page 2 on the left-hand side is what's done. So it's handed over from our administrative colleagues to one of our building inspectors, whoever was assigned the file, and they do a lot of the checks and balances that you would expect from a technical viewpoint. So are there any unresolved matters? Are there any Section 11 requests outstanding? Are there any third-party complaints? Is there any warning or enforcement notices on the site that haven't been finished out? Have there been any changes to the original drawing? So again, in your submission with the CCC, you should clearly highlight any changes that have been made from the original design to what was actually constructed on site. We use that in the sense we check it from a disability access cert or any material alterations, and from a fire safety cert point of view. So any material alterations that affect the certs that were actually granted. I mentioned this then has a clearly labelled and dated inspection plan been submitted and the adequate information submitted on it. On the left-hand side, this is page 2 of the checklist. You get a huge amount of ancillary certificates with a CCC submission these days, depending on the scale of the project, obviously. But we need a list of those, full list of all the ancillary certificates, be them design, inspection, or certified. I'll go into the type of thing we look for revised information on in the next couple of slides, but ancillary certs is certainly one where the wrong local authority can be used, the wrong project is listed different to what the CCC is for. So they may not be signed, they may not be dated. So, care should be taken on ancillary certs that are uploaded with a CCC submission. We also look for building energy ratings. We have a dual role under Statutory Instrument 243 of 2012, and that we're the enforcement around building energy ratings. So anywhere where a building energy rating is required for a new building, we look for that to be submitted at completion stage. If it's not submitted, most of the assigned certifiers down in Cork City are aware it is required. They just upload it and get on with it. Same regards the airtightness test results, which obviously need to go in as a result into the BER. Same applies on the sound testing under Part E 2014. And I'll just discuss that in some issues that we do come across from time to time with regards sound testing. So again, that's our checklist. Everything is hunky-dory, it's valid, it's placed on the register, or it's typically sent out for revised information. So that's essentially the process in Cork City. As I mentioned, what type of stuff are we looking for revised information? I would say, on a regular basis, particularly if it's an assigned certifier maybe that we haven't dealt with previously. So building energy ratings, airtightness test results may not have been, maybe not uploaded. The schedule of documents themselves can be hit and miss in time. So we don't accept that. We look for a full detailed and labeled schedule of documents or an annex attached to the completion cert. Ancillary certs, I mentioned, certainly a bugbearer of mine. Kind of a lot of problems with ancillary certs. A lot of copy and pasting going on, unfortunately. So they're project specific. care should be taken completing them. They should be completed in full. They should be signed. They should be dated before they're uploaded to the BCMS system. Again, I mentioned the inspection plan itself. So the inspection plan as implemented, so we, from time to time we can get preliminary inspection plans, clearly highlighted a preliminary inspection plan, which is obviously required at CN stage or commencement notice stage. That can be uploaded again at completion cert stage. That's not good enough, clearly. What we're looking for is a detailed inspection plan, again, bearing in mind the scale of the project, etc. But as you implemented it, so detailed photographs, detailed dates, what was inspected on those dates, that's the type of thing that we would be looking for. So just following on, more kind of typical revised information requests that we get. I know one of my colleagues here, Kevin, this is a bugbear of certainly his, and it can actually tie into the numbering of housing estates and numberings of apartment blocks as well. So, where you have a very large scale residential development, there should be a master site layout plan showing where and the number of sound tests that have been carried out. Now that applies for sound tests, but it applies for actually the submission itself. There should be a master site layout plan showing what phase of the development and the location of that phase. That should be highlighted, outlined in red, and so on. We can get building energy ratings, air tightness tests for completely different buildings than is required for that CCC, so completely different estate. This has happened a number of times where we've got a completion cert for one half of a semi-detached unit, so not so sure what's happening with the other half, and obviously the party wall in between it, but that's obviously something that we wouldn't accept. The inspection plan itself, as implemented, does not demonstrate clearly that the works have been inspected. As I mentioned, no dates referenced when the inspections were undertaken. So again, we would go back with revised information to the assigned certifier with this. School projects can be a particular issue when it comes to building energy ratings and air tightness test results, that a large school being constructed and they didn't realize that they needed a building energy rating for it. Hard to believe, but we've had a number of cases where that has happened. Again, changes made during the construction stage from the initial CNs and not clearly highlighted to ourselves. That's something that regularly goes back, particularly when we have a CN file. This can happen. We do a lot of inspections down in Cork City, so we have a lot of Section 11 letters sent out to assigned certifiers. Doug and anyone else that's an assigned certifier working in the Cork City area is likely to have received a Section 11 request, but we can have cases where all the items are not fully addressed, and obviously that can delay the completion cert being placed on the register. Just a couple of more slides. So again, under the code of practice, you have this phase completion. So I'm sure anyone in building control authorities can have issues around phase completion. We tend to get it for large scale developments, particularly office type developments. But anyhow, what does it say? Well, it says under 8.4 that for buildings that are completed for occupation on a phase basis, for example, houses or apartment blocks, it is appropriate that certificates of compliance and completion for each phase may be submitted separately. In this regard, a CCC may refer to works, buildings, including areas within a building or developments or phases thereof. The builder assigned certifier signing the cert on completion should clearly identify the precise building unit. That doesn't tend to happen, or units to which which it relates. So again, I suppose the most important thing for a phase type development or for a sign off of that is that it must comply with the requirements of the building regulations. That's what you are signing off as an assigned certifier building, that the work, the phase, the area in question is in full compliance with the building regulations. So issues we can find there is obviously the ancillary certification, the commissioning of documentation. That can be an issue on phase type developments. This is an example of a phased approach where it was proposed to have phase 1 in yellow and phase 2 following on a number of months later. But there is a very large basement structure underneath phase 1 which wasn't proposed to be signed off. So clearly that couldn't be accepted. You're not compliant, you're building on a structure, obviously a large basement that's linking both the properties that's not certified. I think, Doug, you mentioned some of the, I suppose, the contractual issues that are out there in building, and we're not blind to that in building control authorities, to the real world issues in construction. But from our point of view, with the CCC, we're interested in the completion cert and compliance with the building regulations. So don't mix up the phase completions with any contractual arrangements. Clearly your local authority or building control authority will work with you, but we've had issues in the past, and I'd say a lot of other local authorities have had, where designers and contractors are using it as ransom or a payment method for stage payments, or the final payment was withheld or whatever. So just to highlight that. Again, this can be an issue under 8.3, a nominated date for registration. So on paper it sounds like a good idea, but in reality it doesn't tend to work out like that. So what's supposed to happen is 3 to 5 weeks before the end of the project, all the documentation to show compliance, or what you're intending to do to show compliance, has to be uploaded, and we undertake our arrangements. A date is put in place, and then the day before it, you submit your completion cert, and we place it on the register. In reality, what happens, and to be fair, with the nature of the construction industry, the subcontracting industry, it is that date very, very rarely the project is very rarely delivered on that date. So you're into a situation where you're back in discussing it with the local authority, trying to get an extension of time, trying to work out a new date, bearing in mind it's very onerous on the local authority that you have one day when this information comes in. And in reality, it's not just the completion cert that is submitted the day before. You kind of a suite of documentation. We've had situations where we've had CN files and we've had to go out and do inspections on the final day. So it's hugely onerous. Your local authority, certainly in Cork City Council, we work with assigned certifiers on this all the time. Typically what we do is, if there is a nominated date, we'll accept one change to the date. And if there is any messing after that, you're back to square one. Depending on circumstances, obviously. But that's typically what we do. Nearly there. So our validation, I suppose, I've mentioned a couple of times today, before I get onto that, is responsibility for compliance with the law, and this is the law we're talking about, is with the owners, designers, assigned certifiers, and builders. Building control authorities can only validate on the information that is sent into us. The information that's stated in the supporting documents, or in the ancillary certs, or in the drawings, and that they're true and accurate. So we're validating on the information that we get. Obviously, if it's found later there are errors or omissions, can be invalidated. And obviously the final part of that is there can be a prosecution or enforcement, which obviously carries a cost. Just something to note, that building control authorities clearly, in construction, there's a lot more than just building control authorities. You have license and permits for all different type of areas of construction. You have to get your planning. You may need road opening licenses, etc. You might need to connect to drainage systems, that they're dealt with obviously by other sections of the local authority. And then we get those type of queries, we tend to send them on. So I suppose the point there is we're not acting in isolation. Errors on the register themselves, as I put down, could cause issues for selling or leasing. I think that's been brought up a number of times. That's very important, that obviously at the time that it's sold or further down the line, if there is something wrong or something is found that there's wrong in the documentation or the cert, there could be an issue with selling or leasing your property. I hope the NBCO don't mind me borrowing this frequently asked question number 49. I thought it was worthwhile including. So, can a completion cert be rescinded once validated? Well, you can't rescind a statutory cert. What you can do, and the example here on the right hand side is one where the wrong block was, it was an apartment scheme, and the wrong block was called up on the completion cert, and it was only highlighted during conveyancing that it was the wrong block that was after being certified. What happened there was, it can be done, as I said, it can only be done. This is a Chief Executive's order to the National Building Control Office to amend the actual register itself. So again, this shouldn't happen. If it does happen, if there are issues there, you can contact your local building control authority, who will be able to advise you a bit further. That's me. Thanks a million.